I'm about to talk about some fairly dangerous ideas. Ideas that, when half swallowed, might do more harm than good. However, when fully digested, they form a potent philosophy, or more accurately, a mode of being. I call it Autotelic Effectivism, or just Effectivism for short. And before its seed took root in my soul 4 years ago, I was a zombie. Weak-willed, nihilistic, aimless, and driven almost entirely by biological impulses. Effectivism acted as a high-voltage defibrillator, making its way around my psyche and shocking dead flesh back to life, awakening dormant circuitry and electrocuting the most desolate elements of my soul into action. But like all good things, effectivism requires your active participation. You can't just think about the ideas once and expect to find meaning and vitality. You have to let them incubate within you. And in my experience, if you become too tense, too rigid, if you refuse to hold your most prized assumptions up to the light for inspection, then these will remain as nothing more than ideas. This is my first attempt at putting the effectivist perspective into words, and the essay begins and ends with this question: what are you? It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. Science, as this scientist put it, doesn't figure out what is, it figures out how it behaves. The concept atom is just a description of a behaviour, but we still haven't the slightest idea about what it is that's behaving, that's atoming. So then, let's not be silly in saying that we are a body, or a brain, or a part of a brain, or even the atoms that make up that brain, and assume that we know what that means. For these are all conceptual descriptions of behaviour, not substance. So if what we are eludes us, then maybe who we are, a question that invites meaning and relationship and narrative, is where we should turn our attention. The question who asks for the most essential characteristic of someone, and characteristics are patterns of behaviour. So when you ask somebody who they are, they tend to respond by telling you what they do. Take Socrates, who responded with, "I am a lover of wisdom." Feynman said, "I'm just a guy who loves thinking about the universe." And Nietzsche, well, Nietzsche's Nietzsche. It seems that we either answer with what we do, or give the reason we do it by expressing what we value. So if humans tend to answer in this way, then the one thing that all humans have in common, regardless of what they do or why they do it, is that they do. We are doers, actors, and to act is to be the cause of an effect, to collapse a near infinite array of potential actions into the singular action that we actually choose. We do this every waking moment of our lives, but why? What we do differs from individual to individual, but contains an essence common to us all, which is choice. Therefore, we can assume that choosing is more central to our nature than any particular thing that we choose to do, and preference is the basis of all choice. We choose what we prefer, and we prefer what we value. But is there a common thread amongst the various motivators of choice, the various values? Such an answer would get us far closer to an understanding of our true nature and what we're really up to. So is there a drive from which all other drives grow? Is there a value to values? Alright, this is where effectivism gets a little bit dangerous, so don't say I didn't put a disclaimer. Aristotle's book, The Nicomachean Ethics, begins with this line: "Every art and every inquiry, and similarly every action and pursuit, is thought to aim at some good, and for this reason the good has rightly been declared to be that at which all things aim." But I think it gets the question backwards. It assumes that essence precedes existence, that the good exists first and then gives birth to the drives that bring us closer to it. It seems far more likely that we are first driven towards various ends for reasons we only assume to understand, and it is with this intimation of goodness that our drives seduce us to action. Thus, the good is not that at which all things aim, but rather the instrument of aiming itself. It is not the target, it is the bow that moves the arrow of the will. Therefore, to say that the good is the drive of all drives is as much of a cop-out as blaming heat on thermometers. The problem with the view that essence precedes existence, that the good exists first and then calls into being that bundle of values and drives that move us toward it, is that it implies that the good is able to and does in fact exist in isolation, without us, so we may end up aiming to sacrifice our existence for it, as in the case of religious human sacrifices and terrorist attacks. Additionally, it implies that we are able to, and do in fact know, the good. So we may forego much of what makes life worth living in the service of this imaginal good, as in the case of the church's censorship of secular music or cruelty towards gay people. From here on out, I'll call this the objective view of the good. On the other hand, the problem with the view that existence precedes essence, that the drives exist first and that our subjective sense of the good is just an instrument of those drives, is that it allows for moral relativism. The idea that no aims or actions are intrinsically good nor bad, which can embolden the most selfish and parasitic of our drives. From here on out, I'll call this the subjective view of the good. However, what is objectively good is the sponsor of this video, Skillshare. As you might have seen in part 1 of this video, I've been reading a lot recently, and unfortunately I hadn't taken this course on Notion, so much of what I learnt from those books has been lost to my terrible memory. And I'm currently in the process of moving to Bali, so the course has been super helpful in getting my digital life organised while juggling multiple projects. If you didn't already know, Skillshare is the largest online learning platform in the world for creatives. They've got courses on everything from YouTube growth to writing and just about anything creative. Creativity is definitely a muscle, and the more time that you spend practicing your craft, the more effective you will be in your creative endeavours. But you have to learn from people who have actually done the thing, and Skillshare is great at getting such people to create courses on their platform. And you get access to all of those courses for a ridiculously affordable price. I mean, if you drink coffee, chances are you spend more on that. Not to mention they have this learn by doing approach, so you'll actually be participating in the learning experience, not just trying your best to memorize certain propositions. So if you do want to check it out, the first 500 people to use the link in my description to sign up will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Okay, back to the video. The latter, the subjective view of the good, is embedded in much of the grammar of modern Western thought, whereas the objective view is still implicit in much of modern Western behaviour. And the tension between those two is the defining psychospiritual struggle of our times. So how do we solve it? How do we go beyond the objective and subjective view of the good? Key to the subjective view is that our sense of the good is functionally the bow that motivates the arrow of our will toward targets that have no intrinsic or objective moral worth, and are chosen by inner drives that we ourselves did not choose to have, such as the drive to sex. We identify with the will, so as far as we can tell, we are the arrow. Our drives are the bowman who decides the target, and that sense of goodness is the bow that he uses to motivate us. And since we identify with the arrow, with the will, we pride ourselves on hitting our targets, but not on having such targets to begin with, for that was not within our jurisdiction. Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. We pride ourselves on getting laid, on making money, on getting respect, but we slap ourselves on the wrist for ever wanting those things to begin with. This is a deeply absurd perspective on the nature of the self. The bow, the sense of goodness, is judged on its ability to generate force. This is what we often call willpower. But what about the bowman? Is he judged by his ability to shoot arrows in a straight line? Is he judged on how far he can shoot them? Or is he judged on his ability to hit the right targets? It's not a good thing for an archer to be accurate if he's in the habit of shooting his friends. It's not an effective archer who remains collecting bullseyes at the shooting range while the enemy knocks at the gates. So how do we become more effective archers? Effectivism reminds you that you are not just your will, you are your preferences and your drives too. You are the arrow, the bow, and the archer all at once. This is why it is you who finds sex appealing, and yet if I was to ask you what exactly is appealing about sex, you wouldn't be able to give me a straight answer. No pun intended. And it is you who finds pain bad. Yet any attempt to explain what exactly is bad about pain will leave you simply restating the fact that it's there. You'll say something circular like, it's bad because it hurts. Unfortunately, we are designed to see ourselves as just the will. It is very hard to see ourselves as our preferences and our drives because we are unaware of many of our preferences and most of our drives. But they are nonetheless deeper layers of the same onion. What is common, however, throughout the will, the preferences, and the drives, is that they are all vectors. They don't just have magnitude, they have direction. They are all aiming, choosing, preferring. And since we are all three, we are aimers. That is our defining characteristic, to aim at that rather than this. So, by better understanding the nature of aims, we can better understand the nature of ourselves. An effective aim requires three things: a state, a preferred state, and an act that gets there. The preferred state is often referred to as the end of the aim. The end of the medical art is health. The end of the medical art is health, that of shipbuilding, a vessel, that of strategy, victory, that of economics, wealth. When you set an aim, you instantly create a hierarchy of subordinate aims to that end. Perhaps you aim to impress your boss, but this is subordinate to keeping a job, which is subordinate to making money, etc., etc. In all of these, the ends of the master arts are to be preferred to all the subordinate ends, for it is for the sake of the former that the latter are pursued. That we aim for money, that we aim for status, that we aim for health, wealth, love, and happiness. These are aims of which we are acutely aware, and we aim at many other things for their sake. But are we to assume they are the ultimate aims? How could we make such a grand assumption, us arrows, if we can't even explain why they are our targets to begin with? But to what ends could such things as health and happiness possibly be subordinate? When it comes to human action, there are two kinds of aims, two motivators of action. Some are activities, others are products apart from the activities that produce them. In simpler language, we either do things for the sake of doing them, or for the sake of something else. This is the difference between play and work, between infinite and finite games. Therefore, anything that we do primarily for the sake of doing something else, like heading to that job you hate in the morning for the sake of paying your rent later this month, is a heterotelic action. Hetero meaning other, and telic meaning purpose. Other purpose. And anything that we do for the sake of doing it is an autotelic action. Auto meaning self and telic meaning purpose. Actions like listening to music and having sex are autotelic. We do them for their own sake. But did the bowman aim us at them for their own sake? In the case of making love, we know that he didn't. From the perspective of the drives, the bowman, aiming us at sex is a heterotelic action. The value of it is derived from other activities, for without reproduction, there would be no activities. But I mean, music, on the other hand, even the bowman may be shooting arrows at music just to hear the sound it makes, but now I'm speculating. Since all heterotelic actions derive their value entirely from autotelic activities, it follows that there is some other activity in which the bowman is trying to partake, for the sake of which he bothers to reproduce his arrows. For example, it may be that God is not what created life, but rather what life is trying to ultimately create. Again, I'm just speculating here, but it illustrates my point. To the extent that an activity is autotelic, it is not subordinate to a higher aim. But all heterotelic activities are. So while we may not know the ultimate aim of life, the drive of drives, or the value of values, we know that it must be autotelic. It must be for its own sake, since if it wasn't, then it wouldn't be at the top of the hierarchy. And if we are to acknowledge that the value of all heterotelic activities would be rendered mute in the absence of the master aim to which they are all subordinate, then we must also acknowledge that there is no such thing as heterotelic value. Only heterotelic activities aimed at autotelic value. Therefore, the relationship between heterotelic activities and autotelic value is similar to that of shape and substance. That's to say, without the autotelic substance from which they're formed, heterotelic activities would cease to exist. And is it not in our nature to falsely see shapes as separate from substance, to see waves as separate from the ocean, and David as somehow separate from the marble that makes him? Therefore, I will name the value of values, the drive of drives, the aim of aims, and the target of targets by the only quality that we can be sure that it has. I'll call it the autotelic substance. And I say substance in a metaphysical sense to bring to mind that relationship between shape and substance. Okay, we have dug deep enough. This is now the core question of effectivism. It asks, are you, Autotelic or Heterotelic? Do you exist for your own sake or for the sake of something else? Existence precedes essence, so your essence, that bundle of stories and feelings and concepts with which you identify, that elusive sense of a separate self that emerges when you say your name, like the statue of David, is formed out of a substance more fundamental than itself. Just as the marble is Daviding, reality is Angeloing. Angelo is something that reality is doing, and so are you. So is this Angelo activity autotelic or heterotelic? From the perspective of the bowman, this would be like asking if he plans on using all of these arrows, or if he just likes making them. He may enjoy making them, particularly the less difficult ones, but that's clearly not why he does so. Thus, you are heterotelic. You do not exist for your own sake, but to bring about that which does. Returning then to the objective versus subjective view of value, have we not moved beyond that false dichotomy? From this expanded view, the good is a subjective instrument of the drives, which themselves are aimed at the ultimate autotelic activity, which does not exist externally in objects or actions, nor does it exist internally in subjects, but rather it is the purpose of subject-object duality to begin with. It transcends it. So we can package the essential seed of our philosophy into the following proposition: activities precede actors. And we can expand it by saying that these activities are valuable, but not intrinsically or extrinsically, for that entire duality only emerges when you assume that actors precede activities. Thus you are a heterotelic shape formed of an autotelic substance. At the level of abstraction in which you live your daily life, you do not exist for your own sake, but to bring about more of that which does. The tragic misstep of popular consciousness is that we have come to see ourselves as autotelic, that we exist for our own sake. The theory of evolution flooded our minds with stories of how we preserve ourselves, and we have confused it with a description of why we bother to do so, just to go on preserving ourselves. But as individuals, since we know that we die, we've come to see ourselves as players in an unwinnable game, as cosmic mistakes. But this is not a discovery, it's a confusion. It's wrong. We are not autotelic. Individuals do not happen for their own sake. We are means, not ends. If you see yourself as ends, as autotelic, then the entire world becomes a heterotelic activity that is subordinate to you. You quite literally become the most important thing in the universe. And since you know that you die, this becomes a massive existential problem. It makes a lot of people very, very angry. And they do some very bad things as a way to vent their anger at existence itself for being structured in this way. But it is not structured in this way. Alternatively, if you are heterotelic, if you exist for the sake of something else, then you become subordinate to reality, and you become primarily oriented toward what you affect rather than what affects you, and therefore your death quite literally stops being your problem. This is the inversion that effectivism invites you to embark upon. And you might find that when your anchor is outside of yourself, you become far more stable, and all your component parts begin to fall into their right place. But he who believes that he exists for his own sake will be like a ship that drops its anchor on its own deck and then acts surprised when it keeps going adrift. The skillful effectivist knows what to aim at for its own sake and what to make subordinate to higher aims. And his highest aim, to which all his others are subordinate, is to make the structure of reality more autotelic. Not just to be an effective arrow, but to be an effective archer. Entropy is the death of activity, and you are a cosmic foot soldier in the battle against entropy, fighting on the side of the autotelic, so let everything that you do be in the service of this cause. But autotelic activities are as valuable in you as they are in anyone else, and so the swordsman who is so focused on the battle that he neglects to sharpen his sword is not a good soldier. On the other hand, he who is so focused on caring for his own sword that he forgets to use it is also no good. The effectivist ideal is to understand the most effective balance, and to pursue that balance for the sake of how it paints reality, not for the sake of himself. So, what does this mean in practice? Stay tuned for part 3 of this video series. If you'd like to read a written account of this philosophy at your own pace, then go to angelosummers.com and sign up for my Nav Notes newsletter. but I'll be sending out a written version of the ideas in this video, and as I continue to expand upon them, I'll be notifying everybody that signs up. So alternatively, if you want something to affect, then you can join the Compass, which is my free community full of people who are similar to you, interested in stuff like this. Part 3 might take some time because I am currently in the process of moving to Bali, and I'll be making a video about that and why I'm doing it, and updating people with the updates. So English. Alright, see ya.